Hey, and welcome to the latest episode of the PokePopCast. Today, I decided to post in one of the Facebook forums, Facebook pages, and ask some questions of viewers. And I basically got a few questions that are in the same area. So I thought I'd do a podcast here on covering those areas. So let's see. Here are the questions I got. From Martha Hershey-Hans, who is the PTO of the Roanoke, Virginia regional that's coming up. I'll be head judge of that regional, so if you want to head down to that and look me up and say hi there. Martha asks, can you tell us any fun stories about rulings, discussions with Japan creatures, or how do we write the compendium stuff? Dylan Bussert asks, some backstory on Team Compendium. How do you guys communicate? Teleconference, emails, forums. How do you communicate with R&D? Another question from Dylan. Also, what went on in the old secret part of the professor forums before they wiped and revised the forums? I'll cover a bit of that. And Ryan Alred, how do you guys, Team Compendium, view the Japanese FAQ? So basically a few questions asking more or less, how does the rules team work? How does Team Compendium? How are rulings made and published for the Pokemon trading card game? So I'll cover, not exactly in that order. I'll kind of go through a little history and what exactly, how this all works for people. Hopefully it'll be illuminating to some people who have been wondering about this kind of stuff. So I think first I'll start with a little backstory on what Team Compendium is, how that relates to the trading card game Rules Team, and how that translates into rulings that are published and official. So, how did Team Compendium come to be? Well, basically, back in the old days being 1999, there existed, Facebook didn't exist, right? So there weren't all these Facebook forums. There weren't a lot of Pokemon trading card game forums or sites or anything out there. The two main ones, fan forums, were a site called Pojo.com, which is still very active, mostly active in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, still has a Pokemon pages as well, and the Pokegym. And the Pokegym at that time was under the aegis of Asylum, which had a number of different forums, and was not run by us. It was run by, it actually had been started by Brian Brokaw, which I imagine more of you don't know who that is, who should know who that is. So Brian Brokaw put out a book at the beginning of the Pokemon craze, and basically was the first person to publish a list of what was called the Haymaker deck, which was the deck for the first couple of years of competitive Pokemon. A very trainer-centric deck where basically just some straightforward basic Pokemon were doing the basic attacks, but the deck really cycled around using and abusing all the overpowered trainers that were available in the original set. Anyway, Brian had created a Pokemon forum, which he didn't stay with very long, but that quickly evolved into the Pokegym, and that was run for a number of years by Tyaeus, who took it over from him. So Tyaeus had brought on a number of people as moderators, some of which were people who would later on become members of Team Compendium. One of those moderators, Stephen Mumford, but went by the screen name of Corey Boris, had started keeping records of the rulings that Wizards of the Coast made, who had the license for Pokemon at the time outside of Japan, on card rulings. They had these weekly chats, if you can imagine being able to talk weekly with people from Organized Play of Pokemon. It would be nice. We always suggested to them that they do it, but that's the way Wizards of the Coast did it at the time. They had a weekly chat, and people would ask them all kinds of questions. You know, what cards are coming up, what's your favorite Pokemon, and all kinds of things. And among those questions were card ruling questions. they would answer them in the forums, and that would be the end of it. They weren't collected anywhere. There was no good place for judges to find those rulings. So Steve Mumford, Corey Boris started putting that together into a compendium. Unfortunately, he decided fairly quickly that it was too much for one person to do, and his interests had started to shift over to a different game, Imagination, for those of you who remember that. And he asked other moderators on the forum and other people who were active in the rulings forum on that if they'd like to take it over. So the founding members of Team Compendium, myself included, decided that we would take that over. And so for the first couple of years, the entire ruling compendium was questions and answers from the Wizards of the Coast chat, and we collected them, and that was the end of it. If you wanted to get a ruling, you would ask it on the chat. After they answered it on the chat, then we would, if it was a new ruling or not something that was very obvious, we would include it in the compendium. So if you look at the older rulings from those years up through 2000, early 2003, those all come from those chats. After Wizards of the Coast lost the license and Pokemon Nintendo at the time set up Pokemon International, Pokemon USA, which is what was set up at the time, to take over the brand, we presented to Pokemon R&D basically, hey, if you want to continue doing this weekly chat the same way that Wizards was doing it, we'll continue collecting the rulings. They declined that they had no interest in putting that chat together on a regular basis. So at that point we proposed, well, why don't we propose questions to you on a regular basis, and then you can answer them, and we'll then publish those rulings and keep them in the compendium the same way we had been doing. And they decided they wanted to do that. So that's how we did it. Now, the way things got set up, okay, Pokemon actually has a couple of different divisions. Most people are familiar with the organized play division, who is in charge of running and helping organizers set up all the tournaments. However, there's an R&D, research and development division, and that division actually has the responsibility for the actual cards and how the cards work. So we work with the R&D division, and we worked with them, and they set up what's called the Pokemon Trading Card Games Rules Team. And the Rules Team is basically made up of Pokemon R&D and Team Compendium. So the functionality of how that works is we hold regular meetings, usually on a chat function. We had started off with AIM, and we actually used AIM up until this past year when they shut AIM down. And we recently switched over to Google, and so we have our weekly chats, and we discuss what's going on with the cards, what issues are happening that need rulings, whether they're card rulings or in some cases organized play rulings. Occasionally we will bring organized play in to make a ruling on a specific thing that is outside of the normal card functions. And we submit those questions on a regular basis to Pokemon R&D, and they either approve the questions or they say, well, actually it works like this, and then we'll revise the question and send it back. Or in some cases, they will reach out to the Japanese card creators and get an official ruling based on feedback from them. Touching on the question about Ryan's question about how do we interact with the Japanese FAQ, none of us read Japanese, so occasionally we'll see people discussing the Japanese FAQs on different forums or Facebook pages, and so we will reference the Japanese FAQ when we send the question in, if appropriate. But in some cases, we may just ask a question, and then in the answer they come back with, well, here's how it is presented in the Japanese FAQ. So we're not really harvesting the Japanese FAQ. Occasionally we'll get an answer back that seems inconsistent with previous rulings, in which case we may go back and say, well, this is how it was handled previously. Are you sure this is the way you want it? And occasionally, we may do some fine tuning. But in a lot of cases, the answer comes back as, well, that's how it's handled now. So that's a good reason why there's a real need for the compendium, because there are some rulings that aren't necessarily how you would get them just from reading the card. You really need to know the intent of the designers to make some of those rulings. So after we get the responses back from organized play, we put them into an update to the compendium. So we publish that separately so people can subscribe to the updates, so you don't have to search through the compendium every time for when there's a new ruling added, and then those rulings get added into the update. We try to do generational updates when there's a major change in the blocks. However, we've kind of held off quite a while on doing that because when they introduced Expanded, they kept all the rulings, all the cards from black and white on in the format. So we are in the process of working on an update to a Compendium GX, which will strip out some rulings which don't apply anymore. However, because of Expanded, there's not a good way to really streamline the rulings the way we had prior to Expanded. But we're in the process of doing that. Let's see. So Martha asked for interesting stories. The most interesting stories, I guess, come out of the World Championships, where, and I think the way things are working now, there's a lot better communication than there was in the early days. In the early days, communication with Japan was very restricted, and it was hard for to basically get the questions over to them. I think that's improved quite a bit over the years. But back in the early days, there were a couple of rulings. I believe there was, to give an example, from, and this is such an early day, it's from a card from the E-Series, where actually this was after Pokemon took over, but that the E-Series cards were still legal in the format, and there was a Gengar that allowed you to move damage counters around. I'll post the picture of it up here. And the ruling back in the day originally was that the damage counter had to stay on the same side. You could move an opponent's around and move it from one of the opponent's Pokemon to another one of the opponent's Pokemon, or you could take one on your side and move it from one of your Pokemon to one of the other Pokemon. And that was the ruling we were working under. Well, we were at Worlds, and we had set up where we would, after the event was over, we'd hang out with the Japanese judges, which were also the card creators from Creatures, and we were playing with them, and one of them had a deck with that Gengar in it, and he activated the Pokebody, Power at the time, and moved a damage counter from his side of the field to one of Team Compendiums. I forget if it was Crispo or Bulbasaur, one of those. And the damage counter moved from one side of the field to the other side of the field, and we were like, wait a minute, that's not the ruling we have. And we found out, nope, that's actually the way the card works, and so we got that ruling corrected. Here's that ruling I'll post on here, and that was from us meeting with them at Worlds. So there were a couple of times when things like that happened at Worlds. Other things that we've done, there are a couple of judge advisories where we've worked with both Pokemon R&D and Pokemon Organized Play to get information out to judges on how to interpret the penalty guidelines and some of the rules that may not have been being interpreted the way they wanted them to be interpreted, or that were unclear, and so there was discrepancies about different people who were handling them. So here's a link to 2 that were out, one from a couple of years ago and one from a few months ago, both of which are important. So if you're a judge, you should really read and understand these. So I think that's about it. Last thing, Dylan had asked what went on in the secret forums. I can tell you what the secret forums were. I can't really go into specifics about what was discussed in there, but there were, that I'm aware of, there were a secret forum for the rules team, and there was a secret forum for the judge team, which we're not discussing here today. But those basically were forums for, and actually there was a PTO forum. If you weren't in the PTO group, I don't know if you could even see the PTO forum that it existed, but it was there. So they basically just perform functions that you would think they would, you know, where discussions would be had that would have confidential information on those topics, where things could be discussed in confidence, and you know, you don't want to release all the discussions that lead up to what your final decision is going to be. You just want to release the final decision, because number one, it would be confusing to people, and number two, you know, if somebody picks on something that was decided against, you know, it could lead to some bad actions happening. So so that's what those forums were. They fit a good function. Hopefully Pokemon puts together teams like that again in the future, or has discussion forums. I mean, we still have the rules team. Hopefully they put together a judge team again, and hopefully they see fit to put members of Team Compendium on that. I'm not aware of it, so if they have one, I'm not on it. In short, Team Compendium helps Pokemon get rulings out to the players and the judges who need them for tournaments. They back us up and hold those rulings to be official, because we're not the ones making those rulings. Those rulings, at the end of the day, are signed off by Pokemon R&D and Pokemon Organized Play when appropriate. So they are their rulings. We're just helping get them out there to the public, and in an easy way for people to reference them. So hope you found that useful. That's what we do. For those of you who haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please subscribe to it. The more people who know about this, especially those working as judges and organizers, the better, I think. We want everybody using the compendium. I think that has happened quite a bit over the years, over the almost 20 years that the compendium has been around. I think a lot of people know about it and use it, but again, with the game growing, it's always good to get new people knowing where to go to find that information, so they don't have to either not know or get bad information from the wrong source. Again, check out the other podcasts that I have talking about how to do certain things. So, okay, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.